I'm back. Back, of course, to talk about Sinners, which is going to be at the top of all of our 2025 ranking lists by the end of the year. I'm very confident in that. Quick warning before I get into it. I'm sure it says it in the title, but I'm operating this video as if everybody watching it has seen the movie. And if you haven't yet, what the hell are you waiting for? I saw it twice in the same week. But for real, this video is gonna have all sorts of spoilers, so just go see the movie already if you haven't. None of this is gonna make sense anyway if you haven't seen the movie. Ryan Coogler's first and hopefully not last foray into horror territory follows twins Smoke and Stack, who have returned to their hometown for a fresh start by opening a juke joint. But on their opening night, vampires attack, which is obviously such a pared down summary because this movie is so much more, but that's just the quick version. Sinners is about so much freedom, ownership, legacy, racial history, and the binding power of music. And that last bit, the power of music, the blues specifically within this movie, really holds all those other themes together, even down to the whole catalyst for this movie, which, as I said, is Smoke and Stack coming back to their hometown to open, of all things, a juke joint. And I feel like that was done with very specific and intentional purpose, because juke joints are likely to have originated as community spaces on southern plantations for slaves who weren't able to leave the premises and socialize otherwise. After emancipation and the plantation system broke down, juke joints continued to provide gathering places. Blues musicians frequented these places. Places like juke joints, much like the one we see in Sinners, became common between the world wars and were a necessity in rural and less populated locations. This definitely informs a large part of Smoke and Stack's motivations in the movie. And like the film, those motivations are multi-layered. Obviously, we kind of have the more like serious side of everything represented by Smoke. He's more worried about making money to be able to keep the place open and to keep themselves safe because, as Annie suspects early on in the movie, the money the twins came back with is covered in blood. And this kind of point of view that Smoke has about the juke joint is in slight conflict with Stack and even Annie, who see this place for the importance of it being a community gathering space. We see this in their interaction with the man kind of early into the opening of the juke joint, and he pays partially in these wooden coins, which back then were forms of currency that were used to limit the amount of money Black people could spend in white-owned businesses. And they were just altogether yet another way to make it harder for Black people to obtain any meaningful wealth after the abolition of slavery. These juke joints were also really important to blues music, as I mentioned, and blues music is at the heart of this movie. And it cannot be understated how blues music that it is created and originated from African Americans in the Deep South, influenced every bit of American popular music. Jazz, R&B, hip-hop, country, rock and roll, all of it was influenced by the blues. And that's how you know if you encounter anybody in the wild arguing that Black people and Black culture isn't who we have to thank for the music that we enjoy today. Well, they're just plain wrong. They are factually incorrect. We see this most prominently in that scene in the movie, the one that everybody is talking about. When Sammy plays his song, it calls on spirits from the past and the future, and we see them like move in and out of the scene. Not only showing Sammy's power, but seeing the importance of music and how it is this like perfect representation for pain, joy, love, hate, culture, history. Music is powerful and it draws Remick to the juke joint. And seeing the way Remick is drawn to Sammy's power in this scene, like when the camera kind of fully pulls out and we see him approaching, that's when I knew this was gonna be one of my favorite, if not might very well be my #1 favorite use of the vampire motif ever. Culture vulture is out, culture vampire is in. Remick the vampire is colonization. Plain and simple. We know his ultimate goal is to use Sammy's power to see his family again. He knows what Sammy is from the opening of the film. You know, when we hear about the legends of the people born with the gift of making music that's able to pierce the veil between life and death, it's mentioned that in ancient Ireland, these people were called Fili. And I've seen some folks online theorize that Remick might be Fili. And I don't know if it's so much that as much as he definitely at least knows what Sammy is, and he knows of this gift. He knows that this sort of gift exists in the world. I personally think, and this maybe is just my own theory, that that's what he's trying to do when himself and all of the turned people from the juke joint are outside singing, because that scene at first seemed a little bit random, right? The movie's obviously very much about music, but when they're outside doing that Irish song, I was kind of like, what's happening? And so it made me think that like that Remick was maybe trying to use them to see his family again, because as a lot of people have pointed out, compared to the first song he sings, the other song is a lot better. It's a lot more exciting. It's got some like bass to it now that he has these black people joining in on the song, but it's still not enough to do what Sammy can do. So Remick's whole thing is to accumulate all of these things from these non-white people, and he tries to sell it to them as a form of like freedom and equality, but it's like this weird homogenous equality under a white man's terms. And just like white people throughout history and up until today have appropriated all sorts of things from non-white culture, Remick wants to appropriate Sammy's gifts for his own end. And I particularly love how music is used in multiple ways throughout the movie to represent Sammy's salvation in a way. It's set up at the beginning of the movie, like in the bookend scene in the church where his father is imploring Sammy to give up blues music and turn towards God. The music is too important to Sammy. We see this in the car when Delta Slim is telling the story of his friend being lynched, and when he ends this story, he starts to sing. That pain turns into a song, and we see how it affects Sammy for a moment there. Even something as small as Sammy using the guitar to help defeat Remick in the end, I think obviously was kind of like on the nose. It's kind of like a literal like the power of music sort of moment. That was contextualized a little more for me with the very end credit scene where Sammy is in the church and he's playing This Little Light of Mine, but his own version. I thought that moment really informs him as a character. Like obviously this is somebody who has grown up in the church, right? His nickname is Preacher Boy, his daddy is a pastor. So this is the place that he's likely learned to sing and play the guitar, right? Up until the events of the movie, he's most likely done the majority of his singing in church. So up until this point, those things being so closely related, the waters get kind of murky and it could get confusing, but it's the music that is the power, not necessarily the religion or a particular god. And I love that the moment when Sammy hits him with the guitar is literally right after Remick is kind of telling Sammy this. So in that moment, Sammy starts to say the Lord's Prayer when he thinks that Remick is finally about to bite him. And Remick says that he remembers the people who came and taught that prayer to his father, and it ultimately doesn't mean anything, but the words still bring him comfort. So in that moment, he's kind of showing his age also, how long he's been around. And it's this whole idea that the religion that Sammy's father clings to so tightly is this ultimately white man created thing to subdue, to conquer. And so it's no wonder that Sammy's father warns him about blues music. It's exploration of human suffering and just the types of establishments that blues music was associated with back then. Juke joints were at odds with Christian ideals of restraint, of propriety, these ideals that colonizers especially would want to instill in a group of people that, I don't know, might feel violently towards said colonizers, right? And it's at that moment with with that kind of realization that Sammy hits him over the head with the guitar, and it ultimately leads to his downfall. And that is so powerful, and I think that's what makes the movie just so special, because that on the surface, that's such like I said, like a very literal kind of metaphor in that moment, but it's so much deeper than that. That's just like, at first glance, it seems very literal. I could go on and on because there's so many layers to this movie, but as a lover of music, I really wanted specifically to talk about the music in this movie, and I think that's the whole point of this movie, ultimately. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your interpretations of the movie in the comments. There's a lot more horror movies coming out as we're heading into summer, and I fear that Sinners probably ruined a lot of those horror movies. I mean, next one I'm gonna go see is Until Dawn, which hopefully will be good. I don't think it's gonna be as good as Sinners though. But I will have a review for Until Dawn up next week, so I will see you then. Until then, stay strange. Bye.